see if he makes a pass.
Byron?
That was pretty cool. I don't know whether he's doing me or the airplane.
Doing you.
Should have brought back some memories.
I get back in it again.
There you go.
And
go,
now
get
blast that pressure spit 109 at 7 o'clock.
All right, Byron.
We're talking with Byron Clark, fellow member of the Arizona Model Pilot Society, and we're at the airport restaurant at Deer Valley, not too far from the AMPS field. And Byron and I, we've just gotten down from a flight in the B-17G called Liberty Bell. Tell me, what was your reaction to having that opportunity and revisit some of those memories from the past?
Well, you know, I have to say it's not as exciting as it should have been, because I've done this a couple of times before in the last couple of years. But to get in the airplane and hear the noise, and see the cockpit, see the changes they've made in the airplane, the controls and whatnot, it brings back great memories. And anybody who's ever flown the B-17 realizes it's a marvelous airplane. It's sturdy. It takes a tremendous amount of punishment, and you have a love for the airplane. I would say probably as long as you live.
I'll bet. I probably should mention that one of the reasons those memories are formed is because Byron has 33 combat missions over Europe, over Germany, in 1944 in a B-17G, similar to the one that we've just gotten out of.
Very true.
So tell me, what led you to join the Army Air Corps?
Well, I graduated from high school in spring of '41, And of course, we know what happened about Pearl Harbor. So everybody was getting into the military, one branch of the service or another. And I felt it was time to do it too. So one morning I hopped on a trolley. I live in Washington, Pennsylvania, and we're 25 miles from Pittsburgh. I hopped on a trolley that goes to Pittsburgh, and I visited the Navy enlistment station, and I signed up. And I took examinations and everything, and apparently passed them. And they gave me the papers to take home for my parents to sign. And they were like a V-2 rocket. They thought I was crazy. And of course, I hadn't told them at that time that I had volunteered for sub duty, so that made it even worse. So they said no, that they weren't going to sign the papers, and eventually they realized that I was going to get drafted. So they said, "What do you think about the Air Force?" I guess they thought I'd be safer in an airplane than in a submarine. So I volunteered then for the Army Air Corps, and it took a while. Everybody wanted to fly, so it took a while to get a class, and I finally left home in the fall of 1942, and got my wings in the following the 1st of October of 1943.
Now, where did you take your primary training?
I took a primary at Helena, Arkansas, a little town right on the Mississippi River. In a PT-19 airplane, open cockpit. My instructor's name was Jacob Beard, and I don't know how he passed me. He overlooked a lot of mistakes. So some of the guys forced out, and some of us were fortunate enough to make it. And once we get out of primary, well, I went to, I guess you want to know where I went to basic flying school,
Sure.
Which is up the river a little ways northeast Arkansas at Walnut Ridge.
Okay.
And we had BT-13s there. These airplanes had flaps on them and lights, and you could fly at night. The PT-19 was all daytime. Then we got 60 hours of flying, 60, 70 hours of flying time there, and then they decided, somewhere along the line, they made a decision that some people would go to fighter planes, and some would go to multi-engine airplanes.
Well, and I was going to ask you, did you pick bombers, or did bombers pick you?
No, we all picked pea shooters.
I see.
Everybody wanted to be a fighter pilot.
Sure.
You know? And so I don't know. It seemed to me afterwards that they needed a whole bunch of B-17 co-pilots, so they'd just take a major part of a class and ship you someplace for twin-engine training. And that's what happened. I was sent to Seymour, Indiana, for advanced training in a twin-engine airplane.
So what was a typical day like there for you?
In advance? Or?
Yeah, in advance.
Well, of course, there was always school. You got up early, and you had you had the formation out beside the hangar. Everybody got counted and make sure everybody was there, and you'd be off to breakfast, and then there was schooling part of the day, maybe navigation, Morse code, weather, and then you'd go for a flight in the afternoon, and if that was your schedule, and more schooling and early to bed, or maybe some marching before the day was over, and early to bed. And,
I'll bet. Now, when you and your crew got to England, about how many hours in the B-17 did you have?
I had the amount of hours that it took for operational training in Pyote, Texas. They sent me from Seymour Field in Seymour, Indiana, to Salt Lake City, and from there I went to Pyote, Texas. I had then seen a B-17, and the next thing I knew, my rear end was in the right seat of a B-17, and my crew was there, the captain and the 8 enlisted men, or I'm sorry, the 6 enlisted men and the other 2 officers. So we trained there at Pyote, Texas. And after we got through with that training, why they put us on a train. We went to Grand Island, Nebraska, picked up a brand new airplane, brand new shiny airplane, no paint on it or anything. It had all our stuff in it, parachutes and Mae West and flak jackets and a 45 automatic, and well, we went to Presque Isle, Maine, and fueled up, could put as much fuel in the airplane as we could, and then off to Goose Bay, Labrador. Mm-hmm. And Goose Bay, they wanted you to come in with as much fuel as possible because that was difficult freighting fuel up there. And so we were at Goose Bay. It was 40 below the night we left there. It was around Christmas time. And we had a dick of a time getting the engine started. They didn't have enough muffs around the engine heaters for all four engines
keep
at the
warm,
same time. So we'd start two engines, one on one side and one on the other side. And the time we got the muffs on the other engines and got them all ready to fire it up and everything, the other two was so cold they wouldn't start. It went on half the night. We finally, fortunately, didn't burn out any starters, but we got them running and flew across the Atlantic nonstop to Prestwick, Scotland. And they took that brand new airplane away from us. We were there for a couple of days and put us on a train and shipped us down the southern part of England to a town called Bovingdon, which was kind of a distribution place for air crew. And from there, somebody made a decision that we should go to the 379th Bomb Group at Kimbolton, a little town about 60 miles north of London. And I think we went over there in a truck. And so that was our home for until July. And between the first of the year and July, I was back home. I flew the 33 missions in that short period of time.
Goodness, that's amazing.
So we came home. Although we flew over, we came home on a French liner. I don't know whether I can remember the name of it or not, but it was wonderful. Good food. We had 4,000 German prisoners on board, and and our enlisted men had to work in the galley and to serve food to these German people. And it was a French ship, and the French, of course, hated the Germans. They had to actually lock the Germans up to keep the French away from them, or they had to kill them. From what the atrocities that had happened in France during the war.
So what was life like on a B-17 base in 1944? Anything like the movies, the show?
You know, I think that movie, The Memphis Belle, was probably there's probably a lot of authenticity to it. I noticed things into it that were quite authentic. The location of the bombs into Bombay and the fuses. They actually had fuses on the bombs, and they had trip wires going to the fuses, which stayed with the airplane when the bombs dropped and armed the fuses. And there was things like that you noticed that I thought it was quite authentic. I don't think there was much of this business of laying around and playing ball stuff, because there was a lot of mud and it was cold and chilly. And the thing I remember about England, it was difficult staying warm. We had these little coal-fired stoves in the room and it would be roaring hot, and when you went to bed, somewhere in the middle of the night it would go out and you'd be freezing when you.
Yeah, like they say, the coldest I've ever been was a summer in London or something, right?
Yeah, right. But they would come around and wake you up. Somebody would come around and wake you up, and 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock, depending on where you were going, and you go have breakfast and go to the briefing room, and you're on your way.
Interesting. Now, you named your aircraft Swamp Fire.
Right.
What was the significance of that?
Well, I named it myself. Of course, we all had the option of coming up with a name, and it just so happened that they picked mine. But I had read a book sometime earlier. I can't remember, it was a novel of some kind, but a lot of it was about fires in Florida. When they had the tremendous winds, and the fire would sweep across the peninsula with tremendous speed, and so it just came to me, swamp fire, and that's all the significance it had.
Yeah, a story out of a book.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
That was it.
Very nice. You know, your aircraft commander was a first lieutenant, young guy.
Right.
You were a young second lieutenant.
Correct. Now, he had been to Sebring, Florida.
Okay.
That's where they trained the aircraft commanders to train what we call transition, when you learn how to fly an airplane. He had 60 or 70 hours in the airplane when he arrived at Coyote, Texas. I had none. And when we crossed the North Atlantic, why, nobody in the airplane had more than 300 or 400 hours total flying time.
Total flying time.
We didn't know what we were doing. I mean, it was, the airplane was so dependable, and the engines run so well, and that's why we made it.
Mm-hmm. Now, being young and flying in wartime, how do you think that impacted your development as a young man, and how did that influence you in your life after the war?
I'll tell you, it instills a tremendous amount of love for your country that I don't see nowadays in a lot of people. Maybe my imagination, but I don't want to get into the politics of this, but I think you'll find that most people that get mixed up in a war somewhere along the line defending the country have a tremendous amount of respect for the country. And the other thing I would like to say, we built monuments all over the Europe and England and here for the soldiers and the men that fought in the war, but I think I've always thought we should have some kind of a monument memorializing the standard citizen, American citizen who deprived themselves of so much during the war, who paid the taxes to produce all the equipment that we needed to fight the war. And the British especially, they're an incredibly strong race. And I have so much respect for them. They took such a beating in the first 4 years of this war. But I also have respect for the American people. My dad, where he worked during their lunch hour, they made knives during their lunch hour to send. I still have mine at home. It's got my name engraved right in the end of it. And the women, you've heard it all before, they gave their aluminum pots and pans to the war effort. So, you know, we have to remember the American citizen. It was an army in itself, in lockstep, and there was only one thing in mind, and that was to whack Hitler and Mussolini and the rest of the people that were responsible for all this mess that we went through at those times.
Yeah.
So that's my feeling on that.
You know, a lot of the people who'll be watching this are going to say, okay, let's ask some airplane questions here. And so, as you think back on those 33 missions, were there any that were particularly memorable for you? Well,
I think if you go to that site on the web, all you have to do is go to Swamp Fire B-17, and it will lead you to our homepage of Swamp Fire, and you'll learn a lot about the airplane and the crew and so forth. And you'll also read about the one mission where we dropped glide bombs on Cologne, Germany. Cologne's in the Ruhr Valley, one of the most heavily defended part of Germany. There were just hundreds and hundreds of 88 millimeter flak guns there, and we dropped those bombs somewhere around 30 miles from the town itself. And they had wings on them, and like I say, this is all explained. There's even pictures of them on the web of it. But that was kind of a memorable thing because we trained with these things. They put them on there. They're 2,000-pound bombs and with wings on them, and they hung on the bottom of the airplane. And we trained with those things so many times that I think we damaged some of them, so they spun in some of them spun in when we turned them loose.
Now, is that what they called the grapefruit?
Grapefruit, yeah.
Yeah, I think of myself as kind of a World War II history buff, and I'd never heard of that. That's just very interesting. The first guided missile, they had some kind of gyro stabilization.
Yes,
is that right?
The gyros in it were connected to the vacuum system in the airplane.
Okay.
And we have a vacuum system that sucks the air out of the boots on the ice.
For icing.
So they disconnected up the vacuum gyros, and of course the gyros were spun up the whole time. And when we turned the bombs loose, of course the rubber tubes were disconnected, and they were on their own. The gyros were stabilizing ailerons or elevators or what, I can't remember, whatever it was on those things. But some of them did spin in and some of them landed on Cologne, because I remember when we turned, the sky above Cologne was absolutely black with flak. And they probably wondered where those bombs came from.
A good place not to be then that night, huh?
So I guess the fact that it was one of those experimental things, probably people say now, well, this is crazy, but it was an idea. And they picked our group to drop the bombs. And I think outside of that, the other one was a very long mission to Marienburg, Germany. It was clear over in East Prussia, and it was an 11-hour flight. Well, we ran out of fuel on the way back and landed at a fighter base on the Ipswich on the shore of the North Sea there. But we weren't completely out of fuel, but just about. And I hate to say this because we don't fight our wars nowadays the way they did then. But I remember the colonel saying at the end of the briefing, this was Easter Sunday, this mission I'm talking about, and he says, we haven't time, so we'll get them when they're coming out of church. Now, you wouldn't hear anything like that nowadays. It's politically totally incorrect nowadays, but that's the way we fought the war in those days. And that's the way it was, and I don't mean to temper it or warp it in one way or another. That's what the colonel said. So the idea, and you can imagine the Norden bomb site was pretty accurate, but if you aim the bomb site at the railroad station downtown, and the formation is spread out over a mile, and everybody drops their bombs at the same time, you're carpet bombing the city.
Sure.
So the Germans did that to London and Coventry, and so they started it, and we finished it.
Yeah, indeed.
It's a shame that all those innocent people get killed, but it's happening today, and I guess it happens in every war. The war is a terrible thing.
I mentioned to you earlier that I was a bomber crew member about 35 years after you were, and I remember that crew members liked to play practical jokes on one another, and sometimes we would get in trouble. As you think back, were there any particular times where you had some fun with one another, or maybe got yourselves into a jam that had to be bailed out of?
I don't know. Those guys were shooting crap all the time, and I didn't do much of that. But I will say I've heard this before happening, that the relief tube is in the bomb bay in the back end of that airplane, and if you have to urinate, well, it's a little funnel there, but it goes down a tube, and on the outside of the airplane there's a tube that's face aft, facing the strip. Well, if you turn it around the other way, he's going to get it in the face. So that happened on occasion.
From time to time. So you wanted to make sure the crew chief was happy and not mad at you, so he wouldn't turn that baby around at the last minute.
Right, yeah. And we had a great crew chief. That's Nick is mentioned in that website. Nick, I'd like to say, is still alive. He's 90 years old. Had birthday early this year, or late last year. He lives in Bellevue, Washington, and he and these men kept our airplane airworthy, and they worked. They also should have their hats taken off too, because they worked at night and in the rain and everything else, keeping the airplane airworthy, patching the holes in it, and doing what had to be done when we brought the airplane back to them. And so you see in that website that our airplane, Swamp Fire, was the first one to fly 100 missions without an abort. And that's not for us to brag about. That's for the ground crew, maintenance people so they did a great job, and I talk with him occasionally, and I guess I'm here because of Nick DeSalvo.
Now, when those massive formations of B-17s would fly over Europe, they would fly in tight formations. The belief was that all of the guns would be able to protect you all from the fighters. Tell me a little bit about what it was like to fly in one of those really big formations.
Well, you concentrated on flying off the wing from the guy, or if you were a leader in a squadron or an element, why you concentrated on keeping the airplane in its position. It was hard work because the airplane, of course, doesn't have power steering, and there were times when we got in weather, and the formation would disappear, and you're sitting there in weather for half an hour, flying off of just the wing, just one airplane as you see, and amazingly, you'd pop out in the clear, and everybody would still be there. It was incredible to see that, even to us, for that to happen. But it was hard work. The captain flew formation. When he got tired, why, the co-pilot flew formation. Occasionally there were mid-air collisions when you would lose your, what do you call it, vertigo.
Sure.
You'd get vertigo and slide off into somebody else, and I don't know how many airplanes the 8th Air Force lost on account of mid-air collisions, but I'm sure there were many, and they also lost to collision during the forming process, because all the 8th Air Force bases were in a very small area of eastern side of England, and when you all took off and you have 1,000 airplanes up there milling around, the leader of the formation would fire off a flare that indicated he was the leader of your group. So if it was a red flare, you were looking for a red, or maybe it was red, and these would be continually. The flare chute is missing out of that airplane, but there was a place up the top where you could stick the flare gun in there and shoot the flares out. And so this is what you looked for, and so you circled around a beacon, a radio beacon. That's what they call a buncher, and you'd all form on the leader. And sometimes this took maybe 30 or 45 minutes for everybody to get together. And then, of course, they had a specific time where they wanted you to cross the coast so that you wouldn't be mixed up with other people, so that you'd be strung out from, as far as you could see, B-17s.
Okay. Well, that was interesting, because I always read about that. It was like it was altitude and timing was the main components of gathering those mass formations, and
Right.
It just struck me as amazing that you'd put all those airplanes, without radar and without the kinds of nav aids that we have today,
That's true.
and you'd still get a bunch of them out over out of the channel and into Germany.
And it's amazing. It just happened. We would go to the briefing, and that's all we would know. They would say, "What's this is the flare to look for, and this is the time we're across the coast," and you didn't worry about that because you just follow the leader. And in most cases, the leader, when you saw the leader open up the bomb bay doors, well, your bomb bay doors went open too. All you do is flick the switch. And when you saw the bombs fall from the leader, why, we used to call him the toggleier, because he hit a toggle switch.
If you weren't the leader, it wasn't a real important job up there in the
No,
hills,
that's true. In most cases, you could probably, I don't like to say it because I don't mean to denigrate bombardiers, but there's a lot of missions you could have got along without the bombardier. Because there was a gizmo in the airplane called an intervalometer, and you could set it for 1 second, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, and you'd hear click, click, click as the bombs left, rather than a salvo. So it depends on how they wanted to drop the bombs. It's the way you set the intervalometer.
Well, after the war, you did a lot of flying. You were an airline pilot for a lot of time. As you think back, and as our conversation here comes to a close, what was your favorite airplane? What did you enjoy flying the most?
I think the Lockheed Electra was, because it was, it's not because of its dependability, because you could do anything with it. The airplane it was just amazing. You could, New York to Boston to LaGuardia, New York, you could come over LaGuardia at 10,000 feet, southwest bound, make a circle and land to the northwest. The airplane would come down like a Simonized anvil. If you did and then once you got it on the ground, all you had to do was slip the engines into reverse, and the people, if they were strapped in, it'd be in the front end of the airplane that would stop. And getting off was the same way. It was incredible the way that airplane would perform.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, Byron, is there anything I should have asked Is there anything that you'd like to say or talk about that I haven't gotten to?
I think I shot off my mouth enough. No, I think you've done quite well at getting a rough idea of what went over there. Mm-hmm. I wish I could. I'm going to give you, John, a copy of a magazine I get, which has got a description that the life of the fellow went through, almost starting at the same place where I got primary PT 19 training in Helena, Arkansas.
I'll be more than happy to share it with everyone.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was reading it today. But he said exactly the same thing I did until advanced. But no, I think you did a pretty good job, Jim.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. It was great hearing the stories. Like I say, I read it, I've watched movies about it, but then to actually have the opportunity to talk to somebody who lived it, who's a fellow club member, it's been great. Thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It was my pleasure to do my part in whacking Adolf Hitler and Mussolini.
You bet. Thanks. Appreciate it.